Bismillahirrahmanirrahim and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Peace be upon you, good evening and morning depending on where you are at this point of time. Honorable guest, Associate Professor Technologies, Dr. Ramzah Dambo, Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research and Innovation, Universiti Malaysia Sabah, UMS. Honorable guest, Associate Professor Dr. Daniel Muhammad Yusof, Principal Investigator for League for Peace at the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, IIUM, distinguished professors, academic, government agencies, civil societies, representatives, think tank, organizations, and students, welcome to the Sabah Webinar Series 2021, Migration, Security, and Regional Militancy in Sabah and the Greater Sulu Celebes Sea. I hope everyone is well this morning and staying safe. For today's webinar, I would first like to invite Associate Professor Technologies Dr. Ramzah Dambo, Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research and Innovation, Universiti Malaysia Sabah, UMS, to officiate the webinar. Please welcome Dr. Ramzah Dambo.
I'm very sorry, I'm still struggling with this new technology, but please allow me a few minutes, yeah? I just want to, let's just warm up, yeah? Okay, is it clear?
Yes, Doctor.
I thought it's supposed to be 9:30. Is it 9?
Yes, it is at 9, Doctor.
Sorry. That is just some misunderstanding from my side, eh?
No problem.
Okay, anyway, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A very good morning, and I hope that everyone is having a good day. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to officiate this webinar, Migration, Security, and Regional Militancy in Sabah and the Greater Sulu Celebes Sea. Thank you also to the National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Responses to Terrorism, START, at the University of Maryland. Also, U.S. Embassy, Kuala Lumpur, and ISTEC IIUM, International Islamic University in Malaysia. I was made to understand that this webinar was supposed to be a face-to-face session. But due to the current circumstances with the COVID-19 pandemic is picking up and the imposed MCO by the government, our government, it is not possible to proceed with the original arrangement. So now we have to make do with a completely virtual webinar session for 3 days. I was also made to understand that it will until next month, 3rd of September, but probably it is not. It is only for 3 days, yeah. So probably you will have break in between, some break in between. Although this is not the most ideal setup for networking and developing collaboration, but this is the new normal. It is not an option. We cannot decide not to. We must readjust and adapt and turn this challenging situation into a new opportunity. So as I said just now, even though this is not ideal, but we have to make do, and hopefully we can turn this, new setup and virtual meeting to be probably a better way for us to connect and to network. Ladies and gentlemen, Sabah is a state with unique geopolitical role in the region. Migration, transnational crime, regional militancy, and maritime security have been the crucial transboundary issues in Sabah for the past several decades. So hopefully this research could provide some insight, whether it is new or the old one, but we revive it to the relevant stakeholders and policymakers in Malaysia and also in the neighboring countries. I would also like to see this webinar as a platform to nurture better academic culture, especially in understanding further on research methodologies and security topics in Sabah and Sulu Celebes Sea as a whole. With regard to this achievement and ongoing development, I must also emphasize my heartfelt thanks to the continuous support from the US Embassy in Kuala Lumpur and also ISTEC, IIUM, and I really hope that this fruitful collaboration generated with START, University of Maryland, will continue to flourish in the future. Your support and cooperation have been an important dynamic for the success of the project. Finally, the success of this team, who have been working hard in ensuring the research collaboration, despite we have different time zone and the challenge from the COVID-19 pandemic, it shows that the team of researchers from this institute, from all these involved institutions, have set a milestone of achievement. I mean, we have been, I think you have been doing a great job in dealing with the circumstances. There is a vast research opportunities in Sabah and the neighboring countries that can be explored. We hope that from this effort, we could set forward prospective future research and collaboration between UMS, START, and ISTEC. As the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research and Innovation of UMS, yeah, I would like to encourage other entities outside, whether from national or international, to work with us. We have this scheme that I call matching research grant. So what does it mean? If you are interested to do certain research in Sabah or in Malaysia, and you would like to do it with us, and then we can whatever investment in terms of research grant that you want to put into that project, we can match that. So we can do it together. So it is not only you doing it alone, but we will also, willing to put some resources into it. So it would be a win-win situation for both. Yeah. We also hope that from this research and webinar, we could expand the network among scholars and other stakeholders. Ladies and gentlemen, to this end, I pray for the success of this webinar and research and the research project. And I look forward to the publication of outputs from this project, so we can benefit the wider stakeholders outside there, not only academics but also policymakers. So without further delay, I officiate the Sabah webinar 2021, Migration, Security and Regional Militancy in Sabah and the Greater Sulu Celebes Sea. I would like to congratulate the Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities, ISTAC, IUUM, and START, and also University of Maryland for this effort. I wish everybody a very productive seminar. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ramza, for your speech. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Samuel Henkin from the National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Responses to Terrorism, or known as START, at the University of Maryland, College Park, UMD, for opening remarks. Please welcome Dr. Samuel Henkin.
Thank you, and thank you all for attending the first webinar in our Migration, Security, and Regional Militancy in Sabah and the Greater Sulu Celebes Sea webinar series, which is part of our broader collaborative research project, Divergent Dimensions of Radicalization Risk, Migration, and Violent Extremism in Sabah, with ISTAC, IIUM, and UMS, funded by the United States Department of State Conflict and Stabilization Office. As you already know, thanks to Anissa's introduction, I am Dr. Samuel Henkin, a senior researcher at the National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Responses to Terrorism based at the University of Maryland, better known by our acronym as START. For those of you who are not familiar with START, we are a premier research consortium focused on rigorous social scientific investigation of the human causes and consequences of terrorism, violent extremism, and conflict more broadly. Since our founding, START has managed more than $115 million in federal funds for research on questions related to terrorism and other forms of political violence. Over the years, START has been dedicated to fostering interdisciplinary collaboration between top researchers in order to produce and disseminate the highest quality, scientifically validated empirical data and analysis to policymakers, academia, and the public. Moreover, START has research and teaching partnerships with more than a dozen non-US based institutions around the world. Beyond our international network of scholars, START's capabilities include client-focused research and the development of preventing and countering violent extremism, PCVE, training programs intended for all audiences, including professionals. So as such, START has adopted the following guiding principles. START is a public good. Our data sets and research products are generally designed to be publicly available at no cost to the user. This allows for a more active dissemination of our products and also a multiplier effect regarding analysis. START is a living repository. START's research and data products reflect ongoing effort to create a continuously improving knowledge base. This includes archiving this webinar series on individual web pages on START's website. And START focuses on empirically based education and training. START prioritizes incorporation of the latest empirical social science findings into our educational and training offerings. Importantly, and related to this webinar series, at START, we prioritize collaboration in building local PCVE research capacity because if diverse stakeholders are better equipped to develop plans for building partnerships and coalitions to address PCVE and promote community resilience within their own communities, their programs and research are more likely to be successful in better understanding radicalization and thus preventing and countering radicalization and promoting de-radicalization. So over the past 2 years, I've had the privilege of working closely with the research team on this project, and I'm excited that they have an opportunity to share initial findings of the research program with you all in the next 2 hours and the subsequent webinars. But before we begin the substantive research presentations by the research team, I want to provide a bit of background on the broader research agenda to offer some context for how this webinar series came about. So our collaborative research program has 2 primary goals. The first is to engage and foster local preventing and countering violent extremist research capacity among faculty and students at UMS. Throughout this research program, we worked with both faculty and students to add to and refine their research capacities and analytical toolkits to conduct rigorous qualitative research on sensitive topics related to PCVE. To accomplish this goal, we employed hands-on approach to capacity building, where Malaysian researchers had significant hands-on experience in designing and implementing a rigorous interview research design with oversight and involvement from us at START, coupled with numerous in-person WebEx-based training sessions related to a range of research skills like ethical considerations in conducting interviews on violent extremism. The second goal of the research program is to generate a body of research on violent extremism trends in Sabah and the southern Philippines. We believe it is important to fill gaps in extant literature and research on the dynamics of violent extremism in the region, especially with regards to the range of political, social, and economic dynamics shared between Sabah and the southern Philippines. To accomplish this goal, the research team is focused on investigating how Filipino violent extremist organizations exploit migratory flows between Philippines and Sabah, explaining the local objectives of violent extremist organizations operating in Sabah, and understanding the level of traction these groups have with local Malaysians and expatriate populations in Malaysia. Additionally, the research team is exploring the differences between support for Moro separatist groups and organizations inspired by the Islamic State, among other fascinating lines of analytical inquiry that have emerged throughout this research program. These goals and objectives are actively being accomplished through significant desk study and elite-level key informant interviews. We had intended to include a series of focus group interviews with non-elites from groups that are especially likely to be susceptible to radicalization, but unfortunately that part of the research program was not able to take place because of the COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, much of the research program had to be adjusted, adapted, and subsequently transitioned into the virtual space due to the COVID-19 pandemic. While the three final presentations for the webinar tonight will focus on the theme of navigating research management during a pandemic, I think it is important that I point out and commend the resiliency of the whole research team, including my team at START, in circumnavigating this truly unprecedented global event. As someone who has committed their career to research in the pursuit of knowledge, the uncertainty and traumatic impacts of COVID-19 has reshaped how we think about, design, and conduct research, especially research that deals with sensitive topics like violent extremism. It has never been more important to prioritize supporting each other, sharing resources, communicating clearly, and finding solutions collaboratively in our research. Moreover, it has never been more important to foster intellectual and professional nourishment and making connections, which is why we are all here today. I truly believe that collaborations across academic institutions, government agencies, nonprofits, and the private sector are key to building coalitions to better prevent and counter violence and violent extremism across the world. And this project is an ideal example of that, and I'm very proud to have been a part of it. Finally, I want to extend my deepest gratitude to my START team, Dr. Katie Lindquist, Madeline Ram, and Tyler Clark, as well as all the Malaysian researchers I've had the opportunity to collaborate closely with, because without all of you, the success of this research program would not be possible. It is truly an honor to be part of this project with you all, and I look forward to hearing your results. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Samuel Henkin, Senior Researcher at EMD. Now, I would like to invite Ms. Hafiza Nur Adin Nur Ahmad from Universiti Sabah, Malaysia, to give an overview of Sabah's research, migration, security, and regional militancy in Sabah and the Greater Celebes Sea. Please welcome Ms. Hafiza.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. In the name of Allah, the most merciful and the most compassionate. Salawat to Prophet Muhammad and peace be upon him. Yang berbahagia Associate Professor Dr. Ramzah Damdul, Deputy Vice Chancellor Research and Innovation, Universiti Malaysia Sabah, Distinguished Professor, Academic, Government Agencies, Civil Society Representative, Think Tank Organization, and students. Peace be upon you. Good evening and morning, depending on where you are at point of this time. Also, very welcome to the state of Sabah, famously known as the land below of the wind. Welcome to this webinar, Migration, Security, and Regional Militancy in Sabah and the Greater Sulu Celebes Sea 2021. On behalf of our collaborative research team, the National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Responses to Terrorism at the University of Maryland, ISTEC IIUM, Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities, Universiti Malaysia Sabah, I am delighted to have you all present today with us. May I start this opening ceremony by quoting Michael Hayden. Global security can be formed or threatened by heads of state whose wisdom, folly, and obsession shape global events, but often it is the security practitioner, those rarely in the headlines, but whose craft and energy quietly break new ground, who keep us safe or put us in peril. Hayden quotes exemplify our roles as researcher, practitioner, and academic in circulating information, knowledge, and analysis that may influence key decision maker and relevant stakeholders, especially on the pertinent issues that involve state and regional security interests. Ladies and gentlemen, this webinar is part and parcel of our research objective and also preliminary research findings from Divergent, Dimension, Radicalization, Race, Migration, and Violent Extremism in Sabah, which has started right during the outbreak of the pandemic COVID-19 in early 2020. I am also delighted and honored to have the Department of Conflict and Stabilization and US Embassy Kuala Lumpur for research opportunities that has been granted for these three institutions, ISTEC, UMS, and START, to venture into academic collaboration that would be beneficial towards understanding the complexities of security, migration, transnational crime, and regional militancy in the Greater Sulu Celebes Sea. Despite the onset of the pandemic COVID-19, different time zone, distant and remote location for all researchers from these three institutions, we managed to accommodate this research, conducting remote online fieldwork, and more importantly, achieving a successful engagement with our participants. Therefore, we do hope that this webinar provides a way forward for more prospective research collaboration that can look into a deeper level of inquiry on the various security teams in the region and work with potential stakeholders, researchers, and practitioners. Our Universiti Malaysia Sabah is an institution of higher education that produces young generation of potential experts and professionals in various fields ranging from engineering, marine science, technology, economics to social sciences. With this research collaboration, we hope also to see our students, early career researchers, and participants to understand how we have navigated this research, especially dealing with sensitive topics and conducting a remote interview during pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, our research objective illuminated our preliminary findings in this webinar can be summarized into four folds. First, a lesson learned in conducting research during pandemic COVID-19 and how to navigate sensitive research. Second, to understand the geopolitical dynamics in Sabah and the Southern Philippines. This research will explore embedded issues in the Greater Sulu Celebes Sea, such as security, geopolitics, migratory flow, Sabah-Philippine relation, the peace process in the Southern Philippines, and regional militancy. Third, to investigate how militancy and crime of non-state actors exploit the migratory flows between three borders of Philippines, Sabah, and also Indonesia. So this research also explores the regional patterns of non-state actors in regional militancy, cross-border terrorism, and transnational crime nexus in the Greater Sulu Celebes Sea. And finally, we would like to explore as well regional and governmental responses, particularly from Malaysia and Philippines on these broad issues. Therefore, this webinar will take place in a 3-day event, starting from today with a focus on research methodologies on conducting remote interview and pertinence issues such as ethical consideration in human subject research and elite interviews. And then on the second day of this event, scheduled on the 27th Kuala Lumpur time, 9 a.m., or 26th of August, Washington, D.C. time, 9 p.m., we will be exploring introductorization to understand militancy and terrorism contexts in Peninsular Malaysia and Sabah, the geopolitical setting and its dynamic in Sabah and the Southern Philippines. And then on the third day of the event, scheduled on 2nd September, Kuala Lumpur time, 9 a.m., or 1st September, Washington, D.C. at 9 p.m., we will be exploring pertinent issues in the region, such as regional militancy, regional and government responses in the region towards these broader geopolitical and security issues. Finally, we would like to introduce you our team who have been working very hard to ensure the success of this research and also this webinar. Dr. Barnett Coven, Dr. Samuel David Hanking, Dr. Kathleen, Madeline Rom and Taylor from START, and also Associate Professor Dr. Daniel Muhammad Yusuf, Dr. Ahmad Al-Muhammadi, Ms. Anis Izati from ISTAC, Associate Professor Wan Shawalidin Wan Hassan, Dr. Ramli Dola and Jagrup from our faculty UMS. We would like to deliver our warmest gratitude for the higher management, especially the UMS Research Center and also the ISTAC Research Center for ensuring and supporting this research to take place. Ladies and gentlemen, to this end, I would like to end this opening ceremony with warm gratitude to all participants, and I look forward for our fruitful discussion and engagement. We hope that this webinar will be beneficial for everyone. Thank you, and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you again, Ms. Hafizah Adin, for the Sabah research project overview. And for everyone who just joined, if you have any technical issues or if you have questions for our speakers in the next session, please send it to us in the chat box, and Dr. Samuel will moderate questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you again for joining us today, and Now, I would like to invite Dr. Samuel from START UMD to moderate the next session entitled Navigating Research Management During Pandemic. The floor is now yours, Dr. Samuel.
Great, thank you, Anise. So as was stated earlier, we are moving into the substantive research component where members of the various Malaysian research teams will be presenting topics related to navigating research management during the pandemic. The first presentation will be conducted by Anise, so I'm going to hand it right back to you, whose presentation is on research management during COVID-19. And I will be sharing my screen so that Anise can speak, if that's correct.
Yes, Sam. Okay. Should I start now, Sam? Okay. All right. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum and good morning and good evening again, everyone. To fellow presenters and all our wonderful participants. I am Anise from IUM and I start today's panel session with sharing my experience managing and conducting research during the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. This project, it all started when Ms. Hafizah Nur Adin, who came back from START, University of Maryland, after completing a 6-week training stint on geospatial. That is the team. So we have brother Hafiz Iman and also sister Nur Adila and also Ms. Hafizah Nur Adin representing ISTEC IUM. And then Adin is the one wearing a beautiful kebaya, as you can see, the Malay traditional tunic dress. So she came back to Malaysia and she informed Dr. Daniel, Dr. Ahmad and myself about this exciting grant opportunity. And we said, of course, why not? So next slide, please. Other than its beautiful islands, bucket list worthy attractions, and unlike other states, Sabah is a state with geopolitical role in the region. Therefore, there is a vast research opportunities, especially for young researchers, whether it be topics on marine developments of Sabah or to security, migration, and regional militancy. Next slide, please. For me, I believe that it is only fitting that START chose Adin and her team, Prof. Wan and Dr. Ramli, for this research. For example, Adin and Dr. Ramli are Sabahans. They speak the local dialects really well. And as for Prof. Wan, he has been teaching at UMS for the longest time. And Prof. Wan and Dr. Ramli especially, they have conducted numbers of fieldworks in Sabah. So they know the people and the places in Sabah really, really well. So once we put together the team, we see that the team, they're all good and good to go. And we also get great support from START, State Department and US Embassy KL. We get the research project started. So Adin went to START in 2019. So we immediately prepared the necessary documents such as a budget, scope of work, which is something that are new to us. For example, I had to redo the budget for at least 4 to 5 times because it was something new. Next slide, please. At IUM, our budget forms and paperwork are totally different. Not to mention the different currencies, Malaysian ringgit and US dollars, and as well as for the scope of work documentation. This was also something new to all of us, where we prepare each and everyone's scope of work before the project started. That way, everyone will have their own milestone to achieve, and this SOW serves as a good and great guideline for each and every research members of the team. Next slide, please. And in 2020, in the year 2020, we officially start with the research project with START UMD. Since then, we have been having biweekly meetings. There is meeting or reporting to START for every 2 weeks, where we discuss on the research project, how is it going, or if we have any questions or concerns, we will discuss it in our biweekly meeting. And we have been having this meeting for almost 2 years now, but we still cannot get the difference in time correctly. We would always get our greetings mixed up. Like, for example, I would say good evening, good morning to Sam, and Sam would say good evening to me. Next slide, please. That has always been accommodating to our team here in Malaysia, especially. Like, for example, internet connections in Sabah can sometimes be problematic, especially at night. But the start, UMD have been really understanding of the situation. So therefore, most of our biweekly meetings, reportings, we would do it in the morning. So another example would be our meetings, for example, in Ramadan. Again, start has been really understanding and accommodating, as we did not have the bi-weekly meetings because it would clash with sahur time or pre-dawn meals and iftar that is breaking fast. So our meetings usually take place as early as 7 a.m. in the morning Malaysia and as late as 7 p.m. in the United States. So that is only reporting to start UMD. But at IUM and UMS level, we also have to do separate reporting, especially when this project is a part of IUM's flagship project, that is the Peace Building and Civilizational Development Flagship Project at IUM, or also known as To Lead for Peace. Which the principal investigator is Associate Professor Dr. Daniel Muhammad Yusuf. So the team at UMS also have to report to their respective research center. So difficult part is reporting milestones and especially financing back and forth between these three institutions. Next slide, please. So all of this is the timeline before COVID-19 happened. As soon as COVID-19 hits, it has impacted the research project as well. Until the end of last year, both teams at ISTEC and UMS had been working really hard towards completing IRB applications and trainings, and which Adi will elaborate more on IRB in the next session. At the same time, we also started preparing for fieldwork trip to identify water villages in Sabah. Next slide, please. In order for one to do fieldwork in Sabah, especially in water villages, you cannot just go to these water villages, pull out forms for them to read. Also, you read the forms to them and interview them. In water villages, they have their own head or chief of village that we need to seek permission prior to the interview. And it should be done at least 2 or 3 days prior to the interview, or longer, depending on the chief of the water village. And before we seek permission from the head or the chief, we also need to make sure to have at least one translator, okay, that speaks the dialects spoken by the water village people. So as for the UMS team, we are very lucky because Dr. Ramli is fluent in the dialect used by people at these water villages. We also need to make sure that we follow IRB guidelines when interviewing non-elite interviews. For example, we are not allowed to record in any form pictures, sounds, or videos. My colleague Adin and Jagu will explain more on these guidelines. And at the same time, we also have to make sure that people living at the water villages, because they are shy, they can sometimes be scared of outsiders' presence. So they might mistake outsiders or maybe researchers like us as the police or the authority. Therefore, that is why we have to build these bridges, make connections, introduce ourselves and explain our position and explain ourselves properly and in full details in order for them to give and provide cooperation. The UMS team had also taken proactive steps in ensuring the safety of both interviewers and interviewees, especially now in time of COVID-19. Mr. Jagrup, one of the researchers at UMS, he wrote an official letter requesting for vaccine 19 to Ministry of Health. And the Ministry of Health immediately replied and provided vaccines for our research team at UMS. Now that all researchers are vaccinated, they were ready to embark on field work trips to water villages for non-elite interviews. Next slide, please. However, unfortunately, at the very last minute in July 2021, which is recent, when the team was about to embark on the fieldwork trip, COVID-19 infections in Malaysia are at its peak, the highest daily average reported now at 20,000 new infections reported daily. The outbreak has been largely driven by the Delta variant, now the dominant coronavirus strain in Malaysia. The Ministry of Health Malaysia predicted that COVID cases in Malaysia would peak to 21,000 cases by August 2021. And unfortunately, that happened. This is something that we did not foresee or we did not see it coming at all. We immediately informed our colleagues in the US counterparts and informed them about this unfortunate situation. And for the safety of our fieldwork researchers, we sadly had to cancel the non-elite interviews with water village people. Cancelling all fieldwork is the right choice as the spread of the Delta variant continues with so many uncertain consequences, even for vaccinated people like our researchers. So it was a difficult decision to make and disappointing at the same time, but for the safety of UMS researchers and the safety of the communities, this has to be prioritized. Final slide, please. Despite this situation, we continue to move forward. We are still conducting interviews with key informants and elites and experts on this subject matter, which consists of relevant government officials, academics, local community leaders, and CSOs. We make sure that the desk research and webinars are completed within time, which meant as this project's closing deliverables. Despite these hurdles, our team is progressing and learning really well, alhamdulillah. Although we do not have non-elite interviews, but inputs that we have gained so far from KII interviews are ample to provide a promising research report. One thing that we did not expect from these interviews with KII is that now we are able to expand relationship with neighboring countries such as Philippines, Australia, Singapore, and United States, which have all been pleasant. My friends Adin and Zagro will elaborate more on these wonderful interview sessions with KII. I think that is all my presentation for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Denise. Close out your presentation. Great. So our next presentation is going to be conducted by Adin. It's Ethical Consideration in Social Science Research during COVID-19 Lessons Learned from Sabah Research. Let me get my slides available.
Good morning, everyone, and good evening to those in the United States. Today I'm going to present on ethical consideration in conducting social science research during pandemic, a lesson learned from Sabah research during COVID-19. So just a little bit of background. In Malaysia, we do not have an institutional ethics that regulate social science research in our public institution. And I think this has been arranged in more intangible ways. Unlike in the Western countries like in the US, in Europe, or even in the UK, in order for us to conduct a fieldwork, we need to get approval from institutional board that regulate ethical regulate ethical framework for conducting human subject research. Next slide, please. All right. Okay. So today I'm going to talk about 5 things relating to ethical consideration in human subject research. So first, why do we need to apply an ethical framework in social science research? Second, which is a very crucial question that we can ask as a researcher, can we do fieldwork during a pandemic? And then third, who can we choose for our studies during a pandemic? And fourth, how do we navigate ethical framework while conducting our studies during a pandemic? And finally, what are the limitations and challenges in navigating field research during pandemic? Next slides, please. Okay. Ethical consideration, why does it matter? So in this slide, as you can see, several articles showing the risks that we carry as a researcher in conducting fieldwork. Most often when we talk about ethical consideration, this only commonly applies to sciences field, especially those who are doing a medicine field in Malaysia. So institutional board, especially for social science, is still an anomaly concept to our public institution. But based on my own experience doing my PhD research while I was in the UK, and also while I'm embarking on this research, I and my team have to deal with, of course, getting approval and consent from the ethical boards. So we have to prepare lots of paperwork back and forth. The process is very tedious. It is time consuming. And as for me, when I did my PhD research, I have to apply for ethical approval as well. So the concept of ethical framework before pandemic and after pandemic, it's very different. And since pandemic in 2020, it's affecting this research because ethical framework for pandemic is not yet appeared in ethical framework. So we have to prepare the paperwork and so on, and also provide some risk assessment how we can navigate this research while ensuring the safety of the researchers and also ensuring the safety of our participants. So as we can see in these slides, few researchers like University of Washington PhD student missing for 4 days brought before prosecution and detained. We have an academic here, British academic Matthew Hedges, accused of spying in jail for life in UAE, Dubai. So all of these things requires actually ethical consideration. If someone who is not familiar with ethical concept, we might likely to assume and think that ethical concept can be a process that will be a stumbling block towards our research, because we have to prepare the process of application, dealing with red tape, and also we have to basically explain every move, every process. We have to predict as well our preparation before fieldwork, during fieldwork, and also after fieldwork. So as a researcher, in order for us to prepare an ethical application, we have to think ourselves as an analyst before, during, and after the research takes place, how we can ensure all the process will be safe, smooth, and so on, and how we can navigate, how we can protect the interests of ourselves, our participant, and also the institution. And most importantly, as we can see in this pictures, the ethical institutional framework actually can actually provide an advantage for us, especially in terms of our security. So let's say if we are detained or arrested by security enforcement, security apparatus, we can always go back to our ethical application in order to provide justification that we are following the standard procedure, conducting research, and we can actually not only protect ourselves, but also our participants. Next slide, please. Okay. Ethics in research with human subjects. I'm quite sorry about that technical part, but I hope you can read the slide. So first of all, we need to understand that the purpose of ethical review is not to deter any research activities, but it's actually to enable the research to take place on a sound ethical footing and ensure the university or institution can defend the work carried on its name, on its premise, and those involved should the need arise. So this is why we do need to have ethical institutional framework. Second, to address any anticipated risks or ethical problems that may adversely affect any of the participant, the researcher, and or the university, and the step that will be taken to address them. And then third, prohibition against fabricating, falsifying, or misinterpreting the research data. So not only that ethical framework can protect us, but it also could be a stepping stone that prevent us from misinterpret or fabricate any data. And then fourth, to ensure that the researcher can be held accountable to the public. Individuals should take responsibility for actively considering whether the activities fall within the scope of institutional ethical framework. Whereas this is the case, the activity should be formally considered and signed off through the governance structure with regards to degree and risk, including the impact or likelihood of potential harm. So, for example, if your research is dealing with terrorism issues in Malaysia, and you plan to interview individuals who have been convicted in law because of terrorism act. So can you interview those who are still actively engaged in terrorism act, number one, or can you interview those who have been detained and put in prison, number two? So this is another two different dimension that you have to look into, because there is a separation between how the law in Malaysia view those who are currently actively engaged in terrorism act and those who have been detained, or another third category, those who have been released from Malaysian authority and they have been proven innocent. So there are certain category that you have to be aware, and you have to always update and check local authority whether or not you can interview these people. So the institutional ethical framework provide a sort of kind of like a check and balance between you and also your research. Not only does it protect you, but also your future participant. And like, let's say if you plan to interview those who are detained in prison, and the participant said that, well, I would like to actually plan a future terrorist attack, for example. Accidentally, you might pose yourself a risk, because you can be convicted as knowing the information that there'll be a planning of terrorist attack, and you can be convicted under the law because you know this information. So in order for us as a researcher to reduce the risk being prosecuted under law, this is why the institutional governance of ethical framework is very important to provide a check and balance. So institutional ethical board comprised of often senior scholars, senior professor who can look into the content of your fieldwork planning, and they can review it, and they can also give a suggestion. For example, I'll give my experience while conducting research as a female researcher and doing terrorism studies in Malaysia back in 2018 when I first did my fieldwork trip. So my movement, where I go and so on, I have to update with my family from time to time, especially my mom, without exposing the key findings of my data. So it's just basically updating them my location from time to time, and also not to go to interview that will be scheduled on the evening, declining those kind of interview invitation in the evening because it's not safe for you as a female researcher. So even in terms of like gender between male and female, especially for male, I think so there has to be like an extra precaution that you need to be aware of. And this is where the institutional board plays key role. Another example is with, for example, with culture or norms, so, or even religious observation. So like in Sabah, we do have like different cultures and also norms observation as compared to Peninsula. So and also language barriers. So if you go to Kelantan, the Malay Kelantanis have different accent than those in Sabah. So all of this kind of like cultural observation that you also need to include in your ethical process application, because it might impact your journey when you began to embark on the fieldwork. So it's a very, actually, it can be viewed as a very tedious process because you have to think before the event takes place. So you really have to assess the circumstances that may take event in the future. And then finally, this includes federal policies on research misconduct, conflict of interest, the human subject protection, and are necessary in order to make sure that researchers who are funded by public money can be held accountable to the public. So I think that's all for this. Can we move to next slide, please? All right, okay. And then disclosure of information and accounts provided by participants. In some cases, disclosure of information and accounts provided by the informants could potentially expose participants to retaliation from others, such as embarrassment, potential job loss, compromise organizational partnership, damage relationship, and potential jeopardy to any delicately balanced politicized policy process underway. So your interview might not harm you in any way, but it could harm your participant in certain ways. So you also have to ensure that your research question, your interview won't jeopardize, won't cause any embarrassment towards your participant. And then next is institutional board for formal ethical review and sign-off is the cornerstone for the management of ethical issues in the university or institution are self-reflection, explicit discussion, institutional accountability, and proportionality. So meaning to say that, of course, the process can be long and tedious, and you have to deal with the ethical institutional board. There are certain, perhaps even timeline that you have to follow. So for example, when I did my PhD, there's only like 3 times ethical meetings in a year. So I have to prepare in advance. It took me almost actually a month to prepare my ethical framework when I did my first fieldwork. So it's not a very easy process for me because I was unfamiliar with it. And then third, personal and psychological risk to research participant, emotional distress during fieldwork, financial disclosure, physical harm, transfer of data, sensitive organizational information, maintaining relationship with participant and its boundaries. So with this point, you have to also assess all other risks that you may impose towards your participant. Like in previous point, I've mentioned that they might lose their jobs, and then they also might, your research also might impose emotional distress towards your participant. So like based on my experience when I did my PhD fieldwork, I often also encountered like a personal experience with my participant, and it caused them emotional distress because they've been dealing with trauma in their life and events. So how do you manage those kind of circumstances, especially when you notice that your participant feel distressed? So you have to be really conscious as well, their facial expression, whether they seem tired, they seem sad, or they seem unhappy about your question. So you have to be conscious of this physical cue that they demonstrated to you, even though they won't say it verbally. So you have to be conscious all of this. And as a researcher, you should have some sense of humor as well, and be conscious all of this their hue, and perhaps even offer a break or a rest. Would you like to take a 5-minute breaks, or would you like to postpone this interview if you cannot handle the question, or would you like to cancel this research interview? Because as a researcher, you cannot enforce your participant to fully obliged to what you want from them. Meaning to say, you cannot expect your participant to be there for you for 1 hour or 2 hours, or to answer all of questions that you wish they will answer. So all of this intangible arrangement between you and your participant, you should include it in your ethical application. Safety, security, and emotional management of the researcher. So this pertaining to yourself. When I did my interview with during my PhD, and then when I conducted online remote interview with my team for this research, this is something that I've already learned and mastered. But during when the first time I did my interview with my participant during my PhD, it was very new to me. So I was quite distressed. I feel stressful because I've received so many new information. It was so extremely overwhelming for me. Sometimes I took a day off because I need to process all the information. And this is something what we can say how research can impact your emotion. So there are certain events that you will feel so distressful with information that you receive from your participants. So how do you deal with it? Should you share it with your best friend or with your spouse? The answer is no, because there are personal information, research from the data, that you should not share it with other people, including your own spouse, including your own best friend, or even your family. So how do you manage this? So you can always probably consult with your superior or your supervisor how you can tackle this issue, and even consult with the institutional board to get their tips how you can manage your own emotion during the research. And most importantly, the mental health aspect of a researcher is very crucial while conducting fieldwork, because if you're not emotionally stable or even physically healthy, this might jeopardize the fieldwork process, Because if you're not fit emotionally or even physically, then how can you engage with your participant in a more healthier manner? So this is why you have to ensure that your own health is you are looking also into this aspect of your emotional and also physical well-being. And then institutional dimension of financial conflict of interest, institutional risk, adverse publicity, and also financial loss. So the last point is, how do you deal with your institution? If, let's say, your research may put your respective university in a bad position, should you do that? So this is all the inquiries that you have to look into consideration before proceeding with your fieldwork. Next, please. Data protection and management against potential third party. I will extend this in the next slide. But the next point is anonymity and confidentiality. So how the researcher can manage any identifying information that is not relevant to the inquiries of research project will be excluded when describing the participant. So in this point, as a researcher, you have an obligation to protect your participant. You cannot simply disclose this information, especially their names, their organization, even the place where they live or where they work. You cannot simply disclose this information to anyone who asks for this information, not even to your supervisor. So this information should be limited to you only. Also, in addition to this, you need to avoid any identification among participants, as they may belong to a small network, which may then mean it is possible that they could be identifiable, as they may be interconnected to other participants involved in the study due to close professional and personal network. So, for example, if you're interviewing the military or the police agency, so how do you avoid that? You could avoid this identification among participants, because your participant might ask you, have you interviewed Mr. A? Have you interviewed Mr. B? So how do you answer that? Should you mention those names or not? So the answer is actually no, you should not provide those names. And you can always politely tell the participant or anyone that asks you this kind of question, sorry, I cannot share this information because it's confidential. Disclaimer on potential risk with any affiliated parties, organization, or sensitive views and remarks. I've already mentioned about this point. And then covert research and deception. There are certain types of research that will also involve deception, also or operate in a covert manner. So how do you deal with this? What is your best justification that you have to perform this research in a covert manner or using deception? So this is a very tricky question, and unfortunately on my end, I do not have experience using covert research or deception. And this requires close observation from the ethical institutional board. The use of gatekeepers, where research permission of a gatekeeper is normally required for initial access. So for example, like Anis mentioned just now about, if you're planning to conduct an interview in a village setting in Sabah, you have to meet the local head village in order to get their permission to enter the village. Second, to engage with the local population over there. So how do you ensure that none of your information that you receive from your participant that lives in the water village will not be accessible to the head of village? because this head of village, he will be or she will be aware with your presence in that particular area, but at the same time, he should not have any access towards any information that you've been supplied from your participant who reside in that particular area. So the use of gatekeepers and how do you assess how you assess the risk of potential loss of information. And also conducting research abroad. I've repeat this again. This is a similar point from the previous point. If you are conducting research in foreign countries, you have to be aware of their cultural norm and also religious observation. And perhaps if you're doing research in foreign countries, you also have to look into the security setting of the state, which place you shouldn't go, which place that is prone to bombing, for example, or to attacks or any kind of like civil war. So as a researcher, I think especially for female researcher, you need to calculate all of these risks. And if you are early career researcher, this can be a very tricky process. And my advice, if you're an early career researcher, always consult with those senior professor that have been conducting numerous research, so that you'll be more aware what you should do for fieldwork preparation. Next, please. Okay, researching sensitive topics, interviewing with a vulnerable participant. So participant can be divided into elite and also non-elite. And for non-elite, you can divide them from non-vulnerable participant and also vulnerable participant. So interviewing a vulnerable participant, meaning to say you're dealing with children under 18, those with a learning disability, those who are severely ill or have a terminal illness, those in emergency situation. Detainees. So in human subject research, you have to identify who they are, explain the justification for their inclusion. So you have to justify why you still need to interview vulnerable participants, how they will be recruited, security and legal, also political consideration, and how risk involving the safety of participant and researcher will be addressed in the process. And then legal status by law enforcement. This is very important. I've mentioned this in earlier of the slide, that you have to be conscious of local enforcement, how how your local law perceive vulnerable participant. Safety issues and potential harm. So I've already also mentioned this one. You have to also assess your own safety issues. Especially, I think this most importantly applies when you need to do fieldwork in foreign countries, because each countries, they have their own laws, legal enforcement, and also even how local authorities practice those kind of laws in reality versus written laws. So you have to assess all of this. And my advice is talking to other researchers that have been conducting similar topic, or even they've been traveling to that place, is very crucial in order for you to collect some information before proceeding with fieldwork. And then gaining access, potential harm to researcher by carrying out research might lead to being interrogated, killed, tortured, arrested, not just by potentially from vulnerable participants, but also the risk being interrogated by state security apparatus. So this is very common, not very common, but there have been like a few incidents where PhD students have been arrested in Egypt by the Egypt security apparatus, and it's appeared on the headline. This is why the ethical boards is very important. Even though, like me, I mean, I do understand the passion that have been invested by researchers. So if you are very passionate about your topic and it's very, sensitive, so this is the kind of question that you need to reassess. And to be honest, I don't think it's very worth to the point that if your research might cause you to be killed, tortured, or even arrested. And then, of course, gaining trust and building rapport is very important. Maintaining boundaries between exploring research question and knowing more than what it should be. And this meaning to say that there are information that should not be reach out to you. So for example, if you're dealing with former detainees, you can always tell them that I am only interested to know the events that have happened in your past between 2000 until 2015. I'm not interested in anything with the future or even any any of your planning, blah blah blah, and so on. So meaning to say that how you navigate those questions with your participant is also very important. For example, if your participant want to expose you, he's planning like, I am actually planning to do something, and then you can always interrupt. I'm not interested to know any kind of information or relating to future events. This is really to protect yourself, because once you receive any sort of information, you already immediately have an obligation to disclose those information, especially if it's threatening the public security. So this is why navigating those questions, how you demonstrate this question with your participant is very crucial. Next, please. All right. Okay, this is an example of informed consent. So based on ethical practice in the US and also the UK, before your participant agreeing to participate in your research, you need to get their informed consent. So you can always write this an example of this informed consent. Have you read and understood the information sheet about the study? So meaning to say you have to prepare like a summary of your research project, and so that your participant is aware what is the topic that you're going to explore with him. Do you agree to take part on this study? So this is basically his consent. And bear in mind that your participant can always disagree even though he already agreed to sign this form. Like, for example, when I did my PhD, even though my participant have agreed to join the participant, if let's say he feel uncomfortable with the research question, and he do not like to proceed with the interview, you have to respect his wish and discontinue the interview. Do you understand the information you provide will be held in confidence? Do you wish to remain anonymous, and so on? So this is just a few examples that I've provided here, how you can write your consent form. And I have also here one question like, do you wish your interview
Adi, your mic is on mute. Oh no, you are not on mute. Are you? But because we cannot hear you at all. We can see the slides, but we cannot hear you. Okay, everyone. This might take a few minutes for Ms. Hafizah Nur Adin to check her mic. In the meantime, if you have questions, please do write your questions in the chat box. Thank you. Adin, can you try again?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Right.
Great.
Okay, I'm really sorry. I think it's better for me to switch off my video because probably of the internet connection. This often happens, especially in Kota Kinabalu, regardless any location where you are. So
Okay.
continue back to my presentation, and I'm really sorry about the technical part just now. So um, continue with, do you wish your interviews being held in a native language? So if yes, I think it's best for you to translate those native language into English if necessary, and it's best actually to not use a translator. If you still need to hire a translator, then you have to provide a justification to institutional board on how you can protect those participants, especially they are identifying personal information. And then, of course, consent should be granted voluntarily. You should not force your participant to agree in your research. And then where research involves vulnerable groups such as children, prisoners, those suffering from mental or physical illness, particular care should be taken to safeguard their welfare and also interests. And then finally, researchers should also plan in advance how potential incidental findings relating to the welfare of a participant or third parties are to be handled within the process of boundaries of the law, and incorporate this into the consent process. Next slide, please. Right, okay. And data protection and data management. So this is also a very crucial step, especially after you finish with your fieldwork. So how do you protect, how do you collect, and how you handle all of information that you have? If let's say you have a voice recorder, or if you have written notes, how do you handle all of this? So you need to ensure that you have a place or a store or a storage that you can securely store all of your data, all of your findings. Also, all of this data should be protected from any authorized access, and there should be clear and documented access to control process for granting or revoking access to the data. So, for example, if you have the data in a form of Microsoft Words or a PowerPoint, for example, or you have a video in a certain folder, what you can do is always to create a protected password and make it encrypted, so that even though you store it on your computer, anyone cannot simply access it. So you can always create a password that is only available to you, even though if it's stored in your computer. So make sure that you always do this. Particular care should be given to ensuring that human data cannot be linked to individuals' detail unless by authorized person. So meaning to say, once you finish with your fieldwork, for example, and you need to transfer your data to computer, for example, write it in the form of Microsoft Word. my best advice is to remove names first, and perhaps credit or replace it with numbers. So let's say Hafiza number 1, Anis number 2, David number 3, Ahmad number 4, for example. So and then remove all those names into numbers, so that even though, let's say, in case of anything, the name of your participant won't be available to anyone who might accidentally access to your computer, because anything can happen. So what you can do is mitigate and reduce the risk of unauthorized access. It is essential that all sensitive, classified, and or personal data are disposed appropriately, securely, auditably at the end of their lifespan in line with legal and funder requirements. So you have to check with your institutional board whether you can keep the original data or not, and whether you have to dispose all of this data upon the completion of your research. And then finally, the confidentiality of information should be respected within the boundaries of the law. Where applicable, consent procedure should make it clear that if something potentially or actually illegal is discovered in the course of a project, it might need to be disclosed to the proper authorities. Next slide, please. Okay, this is just an example from University of York, how I secure my data when I did my PhD. So how, for example, how am I going to use my own private computers? Will I store all of this data in my personal computer? If yes, how can I protect it? Like here I mentioned, yes, it is password protected, and also yes, it is encrypted. And then you can also explain if you need to use, for example, USB stick. So you have to, it's the same procedure. You have to make sure it is password protected and also it is encrypted. If you're using any internet access, like for example website, so you have to explain how you can secure all those data in, for example, in Dropbox or Google Drive. Will it be password protected or not? Will be encrypted or not? Next. Oh, and of course, in addition, just with data protection, I think most of university, they have their own standard data protection and data management, and you can always consult with the IT management how you can save and secure this data. And also my advice is not to simply use public Wi-Fi in Starbucks, for example, because anyone can actually hack into the Wi-Fi data, and your data, you might accidentally actually risk your data to outsider. So as a researcher, you should spend a decent amount for your own personal Wi-Fi and also internet connection, and not simply to use public Wi-Fi. And then finally is risks and benefits conducting fieldwork during COVID-19. This is in relation to our experience doing our research during a pandemic. So back in 2020, when the first COVID-19 hits Malaysia, we're experiencing a full lockdown measure. So the lockdown measure in Malaysia in 2020 and also 2021 are slightly different in some sense, especially with how fully restrictive it is between 2020 and 2021. And because the pandemic is very new to everyone. So as for this research, this is a very tricky and long process for us to deal with, especially IRB, in order to get a consent whether we can conduct a face-to-face interview or not. So here I would like to share some of risks and benefits conducting fieldwork during COVID-19. COVID-19, of course, have actually posed a difficult part to our research. when the outbreak began in somewhere in September after Sabah state election in 2020, the case began to rise, and last year we cannot even consider at all that we can do a fieldwork because of the outbreak right after the state election. But then earlier this year, starting from January to February, COVID-19 movement, especially in Sabah, have relaxed, and between April and July, between February to April, we began to proceed with our IRB application to get a consent whether we can proceed with fieldwork, especially with both elite and non-elite. So it's been actually quite a few months back and forth to handle this application process, because not only the pandemic is new for us, but it's also new for the ethical board. We actually proceed with the ethical application to conduct fieldwork, and it's been granted for both elite and non-elite. But unfortunately, towards June and July, when the Delta variant began to spike in India and then spread globally, and then it began to rise in Malaysia with some few, although it was a trivial cases, we immediately decided that we had to hold interviews, especially with non-elite. So actually, we've been planning to conduct a fieldwork in water villages in Sabah, in identified location that is not under EMCO. But yeah, unfortunately, you have to halt all of this fieldwork. First of all, because we assume that the vulnerable participant residing in water village, they may not get an access to a vaccination as compared to those in local city areas like in Kota Kinabalu. So this is very highly concerning to us. And we've been updating ourselves from time to time the Delta variant development. And finally, we decided we had to halt the fieldwork, especially with vulnerable participant in water village. But with regards to the IRB application, because this application was made based before the rise of Delta variant. So yes, we get an approval and full authorization to conduct a fieldwork with elite and non-elite based on safety and also health procedure that we have to observe from time to time, and I'm going to discuss it very briefly. And then given the so there are actually benefits conducting face-to-face interview, because in Sabah it's been very challenging because of the unreliable internet connection. Regardless anywhere you are in Sabah, even though if you in KK, the internet is still not very stable, like just where I confronted just a few minutes ago. So this is why conducting in-person interview will expand the pool of potential interviewees. Also, in-person interview will allow us to apply our full range of skill and establish better relationship with our participant. And of course, this increase the validity and robustness of the study findings. Also, other than this, this can avoid any delays and interruption from the interview associated with using an online platform. So for example, when we did our online interview with K2 Elite, we have to make sure that our time is fit with our participant. We have to send an email back and forth to our K2 Elite on arranged date, time, and it has to be, it has to be consented by everyone. So arranging a date and time can be time consuming, because elite, of course, they also have to ensure that they're available on a certain time. So this creates another hurdle for us, especially with online interview, because of the logistical side in securing the interview. And finally, any in-person interviewing carries, in our IRB application, we also mentioned that despite all of the local observation and following the SOP protocols, we have to inform our potential participant that the risk contracting COVID-19 still exists despite observing all of this SOP. At this point, between April to June, before the rise of Delta variant, so this is an example of our SOP that we are planning to follow before conducting a fieldwork. And next slide, please. But unfortunately, of course, we had to halt for a while the fieldwork because of the rise of Delta variant. And I think in the last 2 weeks, for the past 2 weeks, the cases in Sabah has increased tremendously. Yesterday, we're the second highest. I think in April, our daily case is only ranged from 200 to 300 cases daily. And then, unfortunately, since 3 days ago, it's ranged from 2,000 until, yesterday it was 3,000 positive. So it was very alarming to us. Conducting fieldwork during pandemic, should you really be conducting, the most important question that you have to ask yourself, should you really be conducting a fieldwork research during a pandemic? Will it worth to conduct research during a pandemic? So the answer is yes and no. So for us, like, we could have actually conduct a fieldwork if it's not for the Delta variant, but because of Delta variant, we have to halt our fieldwork. And also, it really depends. For example, if you're planning to conduct an elite interview during pandemic and you knew that all of these elite participants have already been vaccinated, you've been vaccinated yourself, then most likely the interview can take place. And of course, there are precautious measures that you can also take. For example, taking a swab test before the fieldwork in order to reduce the risk of transmission of COVID. So this is of our health protocols that we've identified before planning for the fieldwork. First, researcher and participant fully vaccinated prior to fieldwork to reduce the risk of COVID-19. This especially applies to elite interview, but it do not apply to non-elite interview. Following local SOP, including wearing a face mask and a face shield and a hand sanitizer, temperature check for both researcher and participant, and 1 meter social distancing. If there is any risk associated with high temperature, then you should discontinue the interview. Taking a swab test 1 day before any interzone travels, and after completion of the travels. And also, you should take travel permission from your university and also local authority before your travel. And any interview should be conducted on one-on-one basis to reduce the risk of transmission. And then, of course, you have to be aware of the public health risk associated with fieldwork research. So as far as we monitor any changing local condition and regulation, including ceasing in-person research activities or delaying starting in-person activities in particular location until a restriction are relaxed. So in our case, despite that we've planned to conduct our fieldwork, we do not plan to interview any location that is considered under, that is put under EMCO. We only planning, we can only go to places that first there has been no COVID case or very, very low COVID case. And of course, this requires regular updates on COVID-19 based on local statistic. Also, we've been reading a lot on latest medical journals and public health official announcements. So our decision, especially with the Delta variant, even though it's not yet, during that time between June, it's not yet announced by the Ministry of Health Malaysia. We've been reading updates from CDC United States and also Public Health England. So this is why we've decided to finally hold our interview, especially with the non-elite participant. We are still continuing with our elite interview, but we only select those who have been fully vaccinated in order to ensure to reduce the risk of COVID-19 transmission. I think next, if I'm not mistaken, that's all from my presentation. Back to you, Sam.
Great, thank you, Dean. That was really quite insightful. We have one more presentation this evening by Jagrup. And would you like me to share your presentation?
Hi. No, it's okay. I will share my presentation. Yeah. All right. Okay. Good morning and good evening, everyone. Hi, my name is Jagrup Singh. I'm a graduate research assistant from Faculty of Science, Social and Humanities, Universiti Malaysia Sabah. So yeah, the title of my presentation today is Approaching Elite Interview for Sensitive Research Subject in the Sabah Research Project starting from 2020 to 2021. This presentation is also a part of Divergent dimension of radicalization risk, migration and violent extremism in Sabah studies. I hope at the end of this my presentation later on, the audience can get some input from this research experience and also guideline in conducting elite interviews on sensitive issues. So yeah, let's move on to the next slide. So here in the introduction side, there are actually 4 topics that I will be sharing with everyone. First is the right approach to identify participant. Second is the process involved to inform them about the research and getting their consent to participate. And third, which is most importantly, are the techniques to structure interview questions for elite based on their expertise or experience related to this research. And finally, other relevant issues during the interview, such as arranging date and timing and strategize to communicate with various type of participants. Okay, for the first topic, the right approach to identify participant. Before I proceed with before I proceed to deep in my presentation, I would like to explain how to define elite members, which is in order to recruit for interview and also for the research. So there are actually 3 scholars in the past that, such as Zuckerman 1972 states, person that hold a significant degree of authorities inside a group that is already considered elite are referred as ultra elites. And second, McDowell 1998 examined a large group of professional elites who work for merchant and investment banks. This group is considered elite because they are highly skilled, competent, and class specific. Lastly, Perry 1998 proposed the name hybrid elites, urged that vital knowledge does not necessarily emerge in traditional institutions. So yeah, in this research, the definition of elites is narrow than McDowell, because it is clear in the framework of this research project that these persons have significant decision-making influence both within and outside of their respective organization or group. So yeah, before and next, after recognizing and understanding the definition of elite and who are the elite that's suitable for this research, we have made a list of criteria for the elite participants, such as he or she must be adult, 18 years old or older. Second, must reside in Philippines, Malaysia, Australia, Singapore, or the United States. Third, fluent in Malay or English. Fourth, able to understand consent form. Fifth, reliable internet connection. And the last one, ability to receive an electronic PDF consent from form via email. Meanwhile, for the background, we have said like few relevance. We have looked for few relevant government officials, academics, local community leaders, PCVE, expert working for NGOs and IGOs. So in the next slide, the recruitment of elites subject. After having a set of criteria and background of the elite participant, we use these two methods to approach them. First is the snowball contact approach. For example, in our team, researcher, he or she in his or her institution might ask a fellow faculty members in his or her department with research-based expertise on radicalization in Malaysia to sit for an interview, and the researcher will then ask those who have set for interviews to send emails or contact to the other institution to let them distribute this snowball message. So this is how actually we recruit our elite subjects. So after defining who are the elites and also getting their contacts, we proceed with sending out and we proceed with sending out official invitation letter. Participants were emailed an official invitation letter via study Gmail account, along with a brief explanation of the research and information about the interview's objective. Individuals who are interested to then reply to our research team invitation email. However, in some cases, for UMS and or IIUM researchers use their work email account to issue initial interview invitation to known contacts, while the study Gmail account was used to send follow-up emails. And after sending the official invitation letter, if let's say we get a yes from the elite participant, we will send another email of consent form, which is to get their consent in order to proceed with the next stage of our interview planning. So in order to send this consent form, there will be no information that will be collected from any participant, nor or on those who are not interested or initially express interest but not to consent to this study. So here you can, as you can see on the screen here, we use this email as our official study Gmail account, and also these are the example of invitation letter that we send to our elite participant. So if we move to the next part, which is the third part and most important part, how we structure our interview questions. So participants were asked the reason why we have this interview question for is to ask a series of interview questions. Most of the questions are open-ended because the data would analyze qualitatively and individuals' perception about drivers of the sensitivity to violent extremism among various groups of the local population, as well as the nature of their professional experience and their publication on violent extremism in the region are the focus of the interview questions. And the last one, the reason of why we have this and also how we produce these interview questions prior to the interview session. Internal discussion within UMS and IIUM researchers will take place to discuss structure interview questions. So in order for us to design an effective set of effective this interview questions, we follow these few points here as our procedure or guidelines, which is wording of open-ended to avoid making assumptions and can't be so hard, so broad as it will confuse the respondent. Questions must not be unbiased. Questions are unbiased as possible. Questions are concise and specifically in nature, and we also follow ask one question at one time. Clear words choice and purpose of questions ensure that the questions does not reveal any personal information about the respondent. Avoid why questions because tend to corner the informant, places informant on defensive side. So we also have follow like these three type of questions, which three type of question. The first one is primary question, intend to initiate discussion on a theme or topic related to research goal. These questions should be asked of every participant regardless of their subject matter expertise to establish a base in the qualitative data. So here you can see there are actually a few types of primary questions, which is descriptive, storytelling, opinion, and also structural. And the second one is subject matter expert, SME, specific questions. These kind of questions that directly address the respondent's knowledge are highly beneficial as long as the question engage that expert in depth and avoid asking questions that can already be determined by their publication and or reporting. The goal of asking subject matter expert specific questions about their field is to gain a better understanding of their best idea, develop them in already established finding, and explain them to a larger audience. So the importance of, here are some importance of guidance for us to create SME specific question. For example, if let's say you want to create an SME question for your interview or any future interviews, clearly define the topic you want to explore with the SME outside of your primary question. This focus will help your SME stay on track. Leaving a question too wide, tell me about something like let's say tell me about a topic, start as a storytelling, increase the odds of interview alignment. Employed open-ended question to avoid yes and no answers. Compose pointed questions that guide the SME from broad discussion to providing targeted topic centric information. And lastly, respect your SME time and contribution, stay on topic and on time. In short, follow through on the agreed to interview expectation. So the last one is the secondary question. Encourage informant to follow up or elaborate on previously covered topic. There should be at least 5 secondary questions for each core question. And here are the prompt type of the questions that you can write. All right. Okay, so in the next part, we also actually follow this sequence of questions in our interview session, because there are some reasons why we follow this sequence. Get the in order to make it more interesting and also not provocative. So the sequence of the questions are: get the informant involved in the interview process as soon as possible. Before asking about controversial or emotive matter, ask about some facts. Put out some kind of facts, and afterward you can maybe put in one or two, give one or two controversial questions or emotive question matters. Incorporate fact-based questions throughout the interview to avoid long lists of fact-based questions which tend to leave respondents disinterested. Before asking questions about the past or future, start with the present. It is usually better to start with the present and go backward or forward from there. And lastly, the final set of questions should allow respondents to contribute any additional information they wish, as well as their impression of the interview. So we let in the last part, we get their feedback, get the feedback from our elite respondent. All right. So in the next section, I will present the question order. For example, like inductive and deductive and all that. So we also actually follow this kind of format in our structuring for our questions. The purpose of effective question ordering is to keep the interviewer and interviewee relationship harmonious, and to avoid any kind of misunderstanding. Also, like to understand the flow of the interview. So, for example, the first one, the inductive organization of interview question. This kind of question is like more like start as a warm up of the issue, and go into more difficult topics or conversation as a pyramid format. And the next one is deductive organization of interview questions, which is when the interviewee is emotional or connected to the issue and requires freedom to express those emotions. A final structure gives an easy, non-threatening method to begin the interview. So yeah, you can start with deductive type of questions. And lastly, the mix of inductive and also deductive interview questions. A diamond structure of set of questions allow inductive and deductive reasoning to play out over the course of the interview. But this type of questions actually takes longer time to conduct the interview. All right, so the last part is some relevant issues during the interview session. We are still conducting our elite interview remotely, but these are the steps that actually we have see, and also we have experienced ourselves, like how to begin the interview from the beginning until the end of the interview session, how we conduct this interview. So for the first step, introduction of establishment of bona fide for both interviewers and also interviewees. And for the second step, it's important for us to schedule the date and time for the interview session via our Google Gmail. And also we must make sure that both party, the interviewer and also the interviewees, are free on that day. And after scheduling the date and also time, we proceed with generate Google Meet link to conduct the interview and share it with our interviewees. And for the number four, outline or explain the purpose of the interview before begin the interview session. Normally we do it in our email when we send our invitation, and also we do it before our interview start. So for the next, address any term of confidentiality, like just now Ms. Hafiza has mentioned about being anonymous and also not revealing their names and keep and all that. So for the next one, explain the format of the interview that we going to be using. Next, indicate the interview length and also and take a short break between 5 to 10 minutes if the interview exceeded 1 hour. The permitted length for every interview session is minimum 45 to 2 hours. And next, provide contact information for after interview follow-up opportunity for questions, further questions, all be done by our study Gmail. Yeah, next, briefly describe question that we have asked during the interview, that we will be asking during the interview. Ask informant if they have any question at the end of the session. And lastly, for the note taking, we prepared a fact sheet that used to record time, date, demographic, and information from the informant by handwritten. And actually, we are not allowed to take any record any audios or take any pictures during the interview session. So for the closing checklist of the interview, normally we will begin with the first step. After we are done with the interview session, we will determine if there are any additional questions or inquiries that we want to ask the respondent, and we will get back to with the respondent. And the step 2, express gratitude for participation. Normally we do it by via email or maybe verbally during the end of the interview session. And third, check on interviewer condition, especially on their mental health. Like earlier, the presenter has explained how actually mental health is actually affected during this interview session. And the final step, prepare the interview notes in anonymous way and keep in an encrypted and also password file, like also have been explained by the previous presenter. So yeah, that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, group. Appreciate that. That was informative as well. I'm aware that it is 11:05, so if you have a commitment and are unable to stay for a quick question and answer period, that's fine. But I am going to enter my email into the chat box for you all, so that you have access to that if you'd like to reach out with any questions, comments, or want to connect, including my LinkedIn as well. Dean, there is a question in the chat for you. I'm not sure if you had an opportunity to see it, but the question was asked by, and I'm sorry if I pronounced your name incorrectly, but Najwa. And the question basically says, in your line of work, are you protected under the Whistleblower Act? That's the first part of the question. And the second part of the question is, do you have access to mental health support provided by your organization? Or is this something that our researchers need to manage by themselves?
All right. Thank you, Najwa, for your question. So as for the question number 1, it depends if, let's say your participant expose you any information that, like I said, can threaten public security. You should inform this to local authority. And as for you yourself and institution, like in Malaysia, even though we don't have tangible ethical institutional board like the IRB in the US or in the University of York, we have an infinite institutional ethical board. But like in public university in Malaysia, we do have a list of senior professor who will actually observe all our fieldwork application, all of our fieldwork applications, especially for PhD and also master students. So even though that in Malaysia we do not have like an exactly like a tangible institutional ethical like in the UK or in the US, we do have this line of expert that can actually we can refer to. And in addition to this, so they can provide a sort of like a gatekeeper for our research. And in addition to this, we do have, I think in all public university in Malaysia, we do have legal team in the higher management. So you can also refer to the legal team of management of the university if you are facing any condition that will harm you, or you know, if you are being accused of hiding certain information, for example. And second, this is why I would like to retaliate back that having to assess all the risks we associating with your field, especially dealing with vulnerable participants, is very crucial, so that you already have in-hand preparation before actually confronting such issues. And then second, with mental health, this really depends. So if you're a PhD student or master student, this can be tricky because you don't have anyone that you can refer to. So university, they do have their clinical psychologists that you can you know consult with them. But it's very important for you not to disclose any information with regards to your with your participant. You cannot disclose any identifying personal information. Let's say, oh, I speak with Dr. Sam. He mentioned that in the past he hurt someone and this affects my emotion. So you cannot mention those names. And then as for conducting research in a team, like for this research, we have our own team. So we can discuss our experience, but again, we should not, we will minimize any personal identifying information. So you should not, you should not disclose any kind of this information. And as for mental health in general, as a researcher, especially those who have been in this field for quite some time versus those who just new in this field, like Anis and Jay, can be considered as new. And as for myself, I'm still new as well. And as for me, I always practice meditation and so on. So find outside hobby other than your research. You need to take care of your mental health. And always, like for me personally, I always separate between the line of my work and my personal life. So this is very crucial, that your work should not define and should not influence your personal life, because if you do not create strong boundaries between your work and your personal life, this is your line of work can sneaking into your personal life and affecting your emotion. I think that's all from me. Sam?
Great, thanks, Adine. Thank you for your question. We have quite a few comments thanking the three of you for your presentations and the informative nature of your both experiences as well as kind of the trials and tribulations of conducting a very large research project during COVID-19. I'll wait a minute or two if anyone is typing up any last minute questions. Otherwise, I believe that we are slightly past the end time of the webinar, so feel free to log off. But if you do have questions, we'll wait around a couple of minutes just to see if anyone is kind of typing their questions and a response for any of the presenters this morning, and if you're in the US, evening.
I think there is a question on the chat box, Sam, if you can check, please.
So there is a question that just came in. And so anyone who feels comfortable fielding this, but it's from Misa. A question on the matter of interviewing young children who might be victims of the situation.
I actually I don't really understand the question. What does it I mean, what kind of method that she meant here, like the matter of interviewing young children who might be the victim of the situation? I mean, like what kind of the situation here? Or do you mean that like are they children of refugees or living in a war zone? So I need a specific guidance on this question. So as for question from Azila, she asks, it's challenging to interview local population. Building trust is important. Yes, that's right. They might mistaken you as authorities, since authorities also come to the villages looking for information. So there is possibility that they might didn't want to share the information with you since they are shy or afraid or about their safety, or maybe because they have family members from the Philippines living around them. So in order for you to engage with vulnerable participants, especially like in Water Village in Sabah, first you can inform them that you are a researcher from university. You can provide them your contact information such as your email address and your office number. You're not from authorities like from police or from armed forces. Second, you do not collect any identifying information such as their names, their age, or their address. You will not collect any of these. Third, of course, getting their consent. So I don't think it's appropriate for you to visit them and then expecting to interview them immediately. So I think you should make a first initial visit to them, getting to know them. Okay, my name is Adine. I'm from UMS. So I'm doing this research on Water Village in your area. So I'm wondering if I can ask you a few questions. I'm not from local authorities. I'm from university. I'm just a researcher. I will not collect your names, your address, or anything, and I only need to ask this specific question. So if you agree, can we set a date next week, perhaps? If you can spare 30 minutes of your time, it would be great. So if they agree to participate, then it would be you can proceed with your fieldwork, and you can guarantee them that even though they already agreed with the research, they can always disagree while the interview began to take place. And of course, you can also mention to them as early as possible that you don't want any information, anything to do with their family who lives in a specific area, or any kind of like personal identifying information. So you can make this also clear upfront that you do not collect any of this information. And finally, you can also guarantee them that your research is private and confidential, and none of security agency should have an access to your research, and you are taking all these precautions measure. And of course, this research is voluntarily. I hope I answer the question.
Thanks, Adine. A couple of questions have come in since then. So if we can address, Misa has basically specified the question. Do any of you have personal experience interviewing young children? And if so, is there a key technique?
Unfortunately, I do not have any experience interviewing young children, but if you mind, Sam, can I pass this question with two of our well-experienced researchers here? We have Dr. Ramli Dola, Dr. Ahmad El Muhammadi, and also Prof. Wan, if any of you can answer this question, especially interviewing young children. Dr. Ramli or Dr. Ahmad?
No, I don't have any experience of interviewing children either. Thank you, Lee.
Dr. Lee? Probably he's not here.
That is okay. I know that when it comes from a US perspective, it's very difficult to get IRB approval to work with young children. So it is very rare for researchers to work with young children. However, if there are resources, I will have my team and I check and see if we can send something your way. But thank you for that question.
What I know, you still need to get consent from their parents or their guardian before you proceed with the interview. So if the parents disagree that their children can be interviewed, then you should not proceed with this. Am I right, Sam?
Yes, that is correct. Great.
I think Anis maybe can talk about this a little, because we have experience of getting the approval from parental guardian because of the underage issue. What do you think about this, Anis? We have the experience before, I think, on this parental guardian.
Yes, with regards to interviewing young children, when we say young, we also have, when we say interviewing young participants, they are categorized into smaller categories, like for example, from 7 to 9, and maybe teenagers like below 18, 12 to 18. So we also have to consider these categories, and of course within these categories we have to request permission from the children's parents, and without their permission we cannot conduct the interview. It's not just interview, but as well as questionnaire. So we questionnaire, we cannot even even if we want them to answer or do the questionnaire, we have to make sure that they truly understand the question. They are not confused with the terms that we are using, because we are doing a surveys in a PCVE. So before we start giving out the questionnaire, we have a short session explaining to them what is the research about. Sometimes they might not even know what is the research. You see, this is something totally unfamiliar to them. So we have to explain to them what is this research about, and then we might need to have a parental guidance, or maybe the teachers around in order for them to truly understand the question. Our experience, we have to put some time, we have to spend a little bit more time explaining to these young children one by one, especially in the questionnaire, because we don't want to confuse them. Sometimes if we don't explain this well, they will just answer everything as a yes. They'll just take everything as yes, or they'll just take everything as no, and that could not be used for our research. So that is my very little experience interviewing and conducting research involving young children.
Thank you, Anis. So we have two questions that are really quite related. The first is from Sarah and then followed up by Maud. The questions are, how did the researchers conduct the research or data collection and fieldwork during the MCO, and were interviews permissions granted to be conducted? And following on to that, do interviewees require approval from law enforcement when conducting fieldwork in a particular area?
Yes, you need to get permission from the IRB, and you have to, like I said, you have to proceed with your ethical application, assessing all the risks associated with the fieldwork. And then second, you also need to inform your local respective university. In the case of us, Universiti Malaysia Sabah, that we are conducting fieldwork in a certain time on a certain location with information provided that this area with a low risk or even low numbers of COVID incidents. Second, you also will inform your university that you have been fully vaccinated, you've taken the swab test. And then as for the second question, what was the second question again, Sam? Permission or law enforcement. You have to get permission from your respective university. So in the case of us, we have to get a travel letter from UMS in order for us to travel, and we can use this travel letter that we're conducting research to local authority if needed. But if not needed, then you can always just use your travel letter from your university in order for you to travel. But this again depends on local MCO regulation. So if no interstate or no interzone is allowed, then you should not conduct any fieldwork outside then your zone. I hope I've answered the question, Sam.
Yes, thank you, Dean. And then I'm going to field one more question before we close session. We hope that you can all join us in subsequent webinars, and you can save your questions for those as well. But it is getting very late here in the United States. So I want to end with the final question, and thank you for those who have participated in questions. But Azila wants to follow up with the young children. And the question is, are there possibilities for young children's answers that could be influenced by their parent and or guardian?
Thank you, Azila, for your question. Yes, there is quite large possibilities that the young children answers could be influenced by their parents, teachers, or guardians, sometimes even with their peers. So sometimes their answers, when we ask them questions, like I mentioned previously, we really have to make sure that they understand. Sometimes when we ask them questions, then they will look back, they will turn to their parents, to seek some kind of should I say yes, should I say no? Okay, so something even if we ask them, can you please state your name? Even with that kind of question, they want to ask permission from their parents too. So that is why, in terms of, I think I can relate why a lot of research, especially in this area, they do not include young children probably because of this. Maybe the questions can be influenced by their parents, guardians, and as well as peers. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Again, I would like to thank everyone, especially Adine, Anis, and Jagrup for your informative presentations for the first part of our webinar series. I hope that those attendees that are still on will be able to join us for day 2 of the webinar series, which focuses on socio-political dynamics of Sabah and Southern Philippines. And there will be a range of presentations by other performers in the research program as well. I wish you all a fantastic day. And those of you in the United States, good night. But we will be closing the meeting. The recording will be located on START's website, and we will distribute that to our colleagues at IIUM and UMS, and they will be able to distribute to their networks as well. Thank you so much, everyone.